Okay, so I've refined my drawings just a little bit. I spent a little bit more time looking at my subject here, the rock that's tipped on its edge. I spent a little bit more time thinking about how I might fit this sort of triangular prism underneath the overhang of this rock here, and I've also sort of considered what materials I'm going to use and how I might skin it. So I'll talk just a minute about the balsa wood strips or the basswood strips that you're using. If you've got enough for your design, you can stick with these. If not, I'll post another tutorial about how you might be able to make some of your own sort of rough split or rough ribbon pieces out of just some construction lumber or something like that. Really dry pieces of lumber split up really nicely, especially if you can find one without any knots in it. But assuming you have enough of the balsa wood strips that I gave you, you can just go with this kit. It's probably a really good idea to just rough in some measurements. On my concept drawing here, what I'll do is I'll actually use some paper, some thicker cardstock maybe, or maybe an old piece of cereal box, cut it up and just sort of rough in a model very similar to how we did our original folded paper mock-ups. Now in this case, what we were doing by building the mock-up was working out any kinks in the design so that we didn't waste any lumber on the framing project. In this case though, our concept and our mock-up will do a couple different things. If I cut it out of paper first, it'll allow me to kind of cheaply mock up or cheaply build a design. It also is going to help me measure out exactly how much lumber I'll need. So my drawing, my concept drawing, is not only going to give me kind of the idea of what I'll build, but I'll eventually start filling in some numbers here and measuring some of the wood that I'll need. Now, a lot of this is going to be kind of estimates because you know, the rough edges of the rock here are not going to allow for me to make really precise measurements. So all of my measurements I'll probably skew a little bit on the long side. That way I know I'm not going to run out of any of my sticks. So maybe before I get too far into any of that measuring though, what I'll do is I'll start kind of roughing in the sort of triangular shape that I want to fill in this sort of overhanging rock structure. And so I'll bring a scissors in and I'll start probably by roughing out something like a square. And the height of this feels okay, maybe just a tiny bit long, so I'm going to use an X-Acto blade and maybe make some of these cuts a bit more precise. That height feels a little bit better. Okay, so this is starting to feel, you know, approximate right now. In my concept drawing, it maybe started to look and feel almost like a perfect equilateral triangle. And, you know, I'm thinking back to when I was doing my octahedron designs, right? Those were perfect equilateral triangles. But in this case, you know, my triangles may not be perfect because I'm really kind of starting to think about how I might actually fit these into the rock structure. And the rock structure is not a perfect structure either, so you know, perfection here, geometric perfection, is maybe not exactly what I'm going for. What's ending up happening to my triangle here is I'm actually getting something that's a little bit more like an isosceles triangle, where one of these legs starts to pull out toward the side, and I kind of like that design, so I'm going to exaggerate that just a little bit more by taking just a little bit more off the top, and I'll continue to fine-tune my paper mock-up until I'm happy with the design. And then I'll check it on the opposite side and see how that feels. Looks about right. So essentially, I need to make two of these pieces. I'm going to mark which end is the top. That way I can sort of easily see what's going on. Now I can already start to kind of render out some measurements in size, right? I know that my end caps will be both the same piece here, and I can start to measure off about how much material I'm going to need for that. Now your cutting mat has some inch measurements here. You could just line up some of your forms with your inch mats here and take your measurements. If you have access to a ruler or something like that would work too. The grid on your mats are set up on a 1/2 inch grid, so this would be 1 inch, 2 inch, about 3 inches on the bottom. 1, 2.5. And 3 inches on that side. So then I can start to bring some of those measurements over to my design here. So if I want to kind of rough in some estimates here, maybe I'll use a different color for my measurements so it's a little bit easier for me to visualize what I'm seeing here. Maybe my measurements will go in as red. So we've got 3 inches here, 2.5 inches on the leading edge, 3 inches on the bottom. Now I can start to kind of add up those lengths there. So for the front and the back, 6, 7, 8.5 for each side. And then what I'll do is I'll bring some of those measurements over to my sticks. Now, I know that I cut these sticks in the studio for everybody, I believe down to about 18 inches or so. Yep. So I know that I've got 18 inches continuous, and each of you guys should have about 4 of these things in your kit. As you're starting to add up those numbers, just kind of keep in mind that you will run out, and if you really want some parts of your design to be in this sort of this perfectly milled balsa wood or basswood strips, that's something else. Some of you guys then may supplement with some of these rough split pieces down the road. I also have some of these other pieces of wood stuck on the side there, these coffee stirring sticks. Now they're flatter. Those could be used for facing, but they could also be used for kind of construction pieces, so we'll come back to those. Before I get too far into it though, I want to take 1 or 2 more measurements here just to kind of get a sense for what that bottom piece is going to be, what that bottom section will look like. So I've got my rough measurements here. I kind of know about how deep the base on my piece will be. So I'm just kind of mocking that up in my drawing here then, so that I can take a few more measurements and figure this out. Now I know that because the bottom of my isosceles triangle is 3 inches, that I'm probably going to try to match that for the bottom piece, but I don't know this measurement that goes sort of deep here, so I'll take a quick measurement on that. 1, 2, call it 3 inches. Okay, so I know that it's a 3 by 3 inch square then, that sort of works here on the bottom. So it'll be a 3 by 3 inch square bottom with a prism on the side that comes up to a point. Now, I could build this just like we did our skin frame, and I could go into Illustrator and render all this out, and that probably would be pretty good practice. That would also make skinning my design much easier. In the case of sort of using printer paper as the skin piece, I'll do up one of those as an example. One of the other things, though, that I was considering is what are some alternative forms of skinning that I could use? A paper skin, right, is opaque. I can't see through it. There's something nice about that form. But every time I go shopping at the grocery store, everything is sort of packaged in really wonderful packaging. And these are the sort of like stretchy plastic sheaths that sometimes fruits and vegetables come in. And I thought, wow, that might make for sort of an interesting design and model making piece of material. And so I did one experiment with a red version of that and ended up with this sort of mock-up piece that I've been using as sort of my wedge. And here's a closer look. It has sort of a really nice sort of semi-opaque, almost like metal grating feel to it. So I may actually try to work up one of these as well that has the mesh glued onto the back instead of a paper skinning. Now what that's going to force me to do is maybe get outside of Illustrator and do a little bit more free work, but it's really sort of up to you and the sort of feel that you want your final model to come across. We'll now use Illustrator to render out a scaled template that we can use to help skin our form. I want you guys to keep your sketchbook pages handy for this. I already took a bunch of my sort of measurements. I have my schematic here. I've got a good concept of what I'm looking for. I sort of can visualize what I want my folded template to look like in real life, but these measurements will provide just sort of indispensable when I'm actually working here in Illustrator. This template was the one we used when we first attempted this kind of skin frame project. We'll start with a brand new document here. I'm going to go File, New. Since I'm printing to 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper, I'll set up my document in 8.5 by 11 inches. Click Create, and I'll just kind of keep this handout in mind and start with the bottom. I need a 3 by 3 inch rectangle. So for that, I'll click over on my rectangle tool. Keyboard shortcut for that is M. One click, and I can actually punch in my my dimensions just kind of really quickly since I know I want it to be a 3 by 3. So I'll go 3 by 3 here, and that'll be the base of my triangle form. Now I'm going to work with one of my end caps here. I want to design this scalene triangle. Now I'm nearly 3 by 3 by 3 equilateral triangle, so I think I'll start with an equilateral triangle and then modify it. So I'll grab my polygon tool. One click with that, and I can tell it to sort of design for me my three-sided polygon. That's the equilateral triangle. And I can't do edge length easily here, but I can do a radius. So a 3-inch radius. Now this is clearly going to be sort of the wrong size for my project here, but let's just kind of pivot this into position. I'll use the R rotate tool and sort of set that as my pivot point and roll that up and so that it lines up with my other design here. And I'm going to shrink my equilateral triangle down to match the 3-inch rectangle that I have here. Now I have a 3 by 3 design here kind of hanging off the end, but I actually don't need it to be 3 inches tall. I need one of my edges to be 2.5. Now this could be a little tricky, but let's see what I can do here. I need one of those sides to be 2.5 inches, so I'll grab my rectangle tool and I'll make my width here and just do a 2.5 inch, 2.5 inch top, and I'll make sort of like a skinny ruler, 1/2-inch ruler here. We'll just kind of use this as a measuring tool. Kind of swing this over into the design. Use keyboard shortcut R, set my pivot point to the corner. I can just kind of pivot that into position. Now I know I just need to kind of scale down the length of this edge to kind of come down to this point here. Keyboard shortcut A, I'll grab a hold of that corner and just kind of bring it down right to the edge. Now I no longer need that dangling rectangle there. So now I'm pretty close. I have one end of the triangle in place. That looks good. Keyboard shortcut V, and I'll make a copy of that all the way across. If I want to copy it and pull it straight over, I'll hold keyboard shortcut Option on a Mac or Control on a PC. If I want to pull it straight across, I can also hold Shift, and that makes a copy straight across. Now, I can't rotate this into position because of the way that the sides are uneven, but I can right-click, transform, and reflect that triangle. And I have two options. I can reflect it on a vertical or a horizontal axis. You'll kind of get a sense here what the difference is in a hurry if you have preview turned on. Once preview is turned on, I can kind of really quickly make that horizontal or vertical transformation. And with preview switched on, I can easily see that that's the one I want. Click OK. So now I'm very, very close to sort of having my prism worked up. I just need my two sides, the sides that will be this kind of facing side here, a 2.5 by 3 inch rectangle, and a 3 by 3 inch rectangle for the opposing side, or the side that's going to sit underneath the rock face. So I'll grab my rectangle tool again, and 2.5, this time by 3. Oops, I got those dimensions turned around. I'll just rotate it here and align that into position. And then this top rectangle will be a 3 by 3. Now, if I was going to design this in the style of my previous design here, I included these glue tabs. Now, the glue tabs just really kind of help it all come together easily. And I'll have to kind of think through where on my design would I want my glue tabs to be. The way that I'm kind of have this thing designed currently, I'm going to need either a glue tab on the edges, the vertical edges of my sides, or on the crosswise edges of my kind of isosceles triangles on the side. It really wouldn't matter where we go. If you still happen to have this old document, you could just sort of copy your glue tab edges. I'm going to see if I can't get a hold of one of my glue tab edges and show you what that looks like. I'll just click into this group, do a Command C, copy, and bring this one over to this document. And that's about the right size. I can always customize it just a little bit here. Use the rotate tool and pivot it down along that one axis. And if it's not quite in the right position, I'll kind of scoot that guy over. So that could totally work. If you can't remember where your old file is, or you don't have access to it, you can also just rebuild your own. The way that I built them in a previous assignment was that I used my M rectangle tool, and I probably don't need to kind of set it to a specific size. I'll cancel that and just kind of design one just by pulling it and dragging it. Slip that into position. Here, that's going to look like maybe a little bit too long. Keyboard shortcut R, rotate tool, pivot down on that edge. And I can grab this point using A, keyboard shortcut, and just pull that edge in just a little bit. And this way the glue tabs don't get hung up in the folded corners. So whether you're copying a previously designed glue tab, or you're making them on your own, either one will work. I'm going to rotate this into position here. It's probably easiest just to stick one corner down. Keyboard shortcut R, rotate that into position. Now I need to copy both of these two glue tabs. Hold Option and pull those down. I'm going to do a right click, transform, reflect. This time I'll do a horizontal transformation, and I should just be able to kind of pull these two up. Oh, they're not quite into, oh, that's right, it's not a perfect triangle. That's okay, I'll just use the same glue tabs here. Keyboard shortcut R, pivot this one into position. It's just a little too big on that shorter side, so I'll just shorten the whole tab up. Since these will be hidden inside of the design, I don't have to have them to be spot on. Copy this one over now that I have it the correct size. Now, it may be a little bit easier to sort of differentiate between which piece is which here if I sort of make my glue tabs a little bit different color. Oftentimes, I'll kind of just give those a gray tone here. That way, I can see the inside outside. This is also a chance for you to make a few decisions about texturing the outside or giving it some sort of design. I'm going to use this kind of striped line design similar to my last one because I think it's easy to pick up on the video tutorial. The way that I designed that was I used just a line tool. And I'm going to make my lines too big for now. And I'll just make a copy of them, select them both, make a copy of those. And don't worry too much about the spacing at this point because I'll bump those lines out. So these are all unevenly spaced, and that could create kind of an interesting design. But if I select all those designs and I use my Align palette, if you don't have your Align palette open, go to Window, Align, and I'm just going to vertically distribute those so that now I have something a little bit more like a pinstripe design. I'm going to lay that in. Nope, doesn't look like I quite have enough, so I'll just kind of copy this a little bit more. Make one more copy here. Distribute them all once more. And lay that on top of my design. Looks like I could use just a little bit wider, a few more stripes. distribute those one more time and lay that on top of my design. Now, since I can easily see where my design is and where it isn't, I wouldn't really have to do any cutting at this point. But if I want my design to sort of be fitted and perfectly have stripes laying in between, it might be useful to just sort of make each one of these lines fit carefully into the design. One way to do that would just be to sort of select each one of these endpoints and bring them down to the edge of your design manually. There's nothing wrong with that. That totally works. There are ways, though, that you could use a Pathfinder tool and just sort of snap each one of those to fit. For the purposes of this demo, this is a pretty simplistic pattern. I'm just going to tap all these ones into position using the keyboard shortcut A and align each one of those points. So this design is pretty much ready to print. I'm going to bring it over to my 8.5 by 11 inch document. Before I do that, I'll use keyboard shortcut V, select over the entire design, and do a Command G group. That way when I pull it around, it doesn't fall apart. If I don't group the design, every time I click and pull on it, each individual piece might fall apart on me. And I don't really want to have to be worrying about losing each one of these pieces. So select over the whole thing, Command G. Bring that back over, and it looks like I won't be able to get more than one design to scale on a piece of paper. I usually like to kind of work up a mock-up of my design before I commit to it, so I'm going to do a Command P, send this to my printer, and print 2 copies. That way I have one for a mock-up and one for the final wood framing. And I'll see you guys back in the studio. So back in the studio, I've got my printouts. Just like in our previous project, I'm going to do a mock-up because I'd like to see it sort of to scale in my project here before I commit all the time to wood framing that whole piece. I don't have enough of wood frame to kind of make those mistakes, and so before I commit the wood to the frame, I'm going to just do a quick cut, fold, and glue up and see how that scale looks. So in order to get that to release really quickly and easily from the paper, just a reminder from the last time that we did this project, if you carefully cross-cut all of your outside edges or do a slight overcut, your piece will just drop right out. Now I'm guessing that most of you aren't going to have a bone folder at home, so you can kind of just use a fingernail to do these folds. That's not a problem. If you fold them over a straight edge, that's going to kind of clean up your fold significantly. So since this is the last time you'll be able to get access to any one of those inside or outside folds, go ahead and do a hard crease on all these paper folds. The glue folds don't need to be hard creased because they're not going to be folded so far. Okay, now you can kind of start to envision how this form is going to come together. That's looking kind of nice. I think what I'll do is I'll just put a little glue on those tabs, get this thing sorted out, and eyeball it in place. The glue we'll use is some of that PVA glue again, and since this is just a paper mock-up, you don't have to be super precise about getting glue in all the right places. But I am going to be careful not to get it all over my cutting mat or a table wherever I'm working, so I'll have a scrap piece of paper close by to catch any over glue marks. Okay, so paper mock-up is going to serve two purposes. For first, it's sort of a great way for me to help gauge the overall size and arrangement of my design. Basically, what I'm looking for here is I really wanted my kind of final piece to kind of wrap over and sort of finish the size and dimension of this rock. And it looks like I was pretty close in my original measurements. I kind of like the idea of including a texture and design around the outside. It would have been nice maybe if I had wrapped the horizontal lines all the way around, but I'm just going to leave my template this way. What I'm mostly paying attention to now is how did I do in terms of getting my width and height measurements. It looks like, you know, it's maybe a little bit shorter than I wished. I could go back and redesign this piece, but I'm going to frame this one as is. But this would be a great point where you could sort of stop and catch any first draft mistakes that would prevent you from wasting a bunch of wood. Like, for example, I have a little more space here that I would like. So if my original measurement was 3 inches, I probably could have gone 3.5 or 3.25 inches wide. My overall height is looking okay. I think maybe if I had sort of come back in and redesigned, you know, maybe something a little bit taller would have been better for the design. But we'll see how the wood frame piece goes. There, as with most sort of paper design pieces, there are flaws that, you know, I probably should have put a fold at this corner. That way it would have, if I put a glue tab on the top, it wouldn't have been an open seam. But these sort of paper models are, for the most part, they're just an opportunity to kind of see the scale in place. From this point on, I think what I'll do is actually bring my other template over and start fabricating the wood framing. So I'll keep on using this brush. It's a really good idea to have some water around. The water sort of prevents your brush from drying out, and also maybe an old rag for dabbing. That way you don't accidentally bring water to your printouts. To begin the process of wood framing out this template, it's probably a really good idea to do just a bit of math to make sure that I've got enough wood here before I get halfway through my design and realize there's no way to get around it. It is possible, you know, that you could find some more of these pieces, purchase them online or something like that. But let's just, you know, get in the habit of making sure we have enough material to complete our design. So a couple of quick bits of math. I want to know what the perimeter of each one of these boxes is going to be when I start adding it all up, and I want to know what these two triangles are going to be. You could use the cutting board that you have. That's divided into a 1/2-inch grid. I happen to have a little tape measure here, so just a quick reminder for myself, I designed 3 by 2.5. We'll just call it, for the sake of simplicity, 3 by 3, 3 by 3, 3 by 3 boxes. That way I can do my math a little bit quicker, and if I calculate to have too much, then I'll never run out. So if I have 3 by 3 inch boxes, that's basically I need 12 inches of material times 3. I need 36 inches of material in order to do my 3 boxes here. Now, I know that my pyramids aren't perfect 3-inch equilateral triangles, but I'm going to kind of like work with 3 inches as my measurement now. I'm going to overestimate how much I need so that I don't short it. So that's going to be an extra 9 inches for each triangle. Times 2 is another 18 inches. So essentially, if my sticks are 18 inches in length, I'm just going to double check that again. Yep, 18 inches in length. I'll need 1 stick for my 2 triangles, and then I'll need 2 more sticks to knock out all 3 of these boxes. How many do I have left? 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. So I'll have a little bit extra by the time I'm all finished up. That just makes me feel good so that I don't get halfway through my project and run out of material. So I've got my PVA glue handy, a little bit of scrap material floating close by. It's also not a bad idea to have like a heavy book or something like a paperweight around. That way I can use a little bit of weight to just sort of set on my piece. If I kind of come back to this over the course of a few days, it's nice to be able to just kind of set a nice heavy object on top of my piece as it glues up. The glue dries in about 30 seconds or so, but it's still just kind of nice to be able to have that. So what I'll do is I'll lay my wood sticks around the perimeter of my shapes here and just start working around each one of them, cutting with my X-Acto blade as I go.